and welcome to the Institute for Government. Those of you that haven't been here before, I'm Jill Rutter. I'm the Director of our Better Policymaking Programme, and we're absolutely delighted to have another in our series of cutting-edge policy seminars. A bit of time ago, we were talking to Will Cavendish, who's Director General in the Cabinet Office, one of our speakers tonight, and he suggested it would be really, really good if IFG could do something on how can governments really use crowdsourcing. What was the potential, what were the limitations, things like that. So that's what we're going to discuss here tonight. We have a really top panel. We've also, due respect to Will produced some very nice slides, but I've suggested that it isn't a sort of PowerPoint sort of evening. So if you really want to see Will's slides, you'll be able to see them on the IFG website quite shortly after the event, probably in a couple of days. So don't go on there instantly and get really, really disappointed. If you want to let all your chums in your social media networks know where you are and what you're doing, we have Wi-Fi details. Our username is IFG. Password is visitor. These don't suggest to be the most secure username in the universe. But anyway, and the hashtag for today is #IFGCrowds. So don't get it confused with what we were tweeting from earlier today, which was the launch of the LSE Growth Commission. So only about an hour ago, we had a bunch of Nobel Prize-winning economists in here. So we've done a very fast turnaround. So we've got an absolutely brilliant panel tonight. We have the aforesaid Will Cavendish, who is the Director General. Basically, he's been running the Red Tape Challenge, but he sort of accretes functions, probably as the rest of government shrinks. And he's now in charge of Open Public Services as well. He's been Director General of Health and Wellbeing at the Department of Health, Director of Strategy there, Senior Advisor. He seems, in this bio, I've got to have missed off that he was DG doing international climate change. He's been in the Strategy Unit, Special Advisor to the Secretary of State for Education and Skills, Head of Policy at the Labour Party. And he's
don't mention that now. That's a bit of the CV I've deleted.
He hasn't been Head of Policy for the Labour Party, so please don't tweet that. He also has a PhD in economics from Oxford. Do you mention that these days, or maybe not? Anyway. So basically, a CV to die for. The next, we're going to invite Roger Hampson. So Roger's Chief Executive of Redbridge. So he sits on the Local Government Data Panel, and he's been at the forefront of Redbridge's great innovations on Redbridge Eye, which can customise and personalise, which uses many of Web 2.0 features to encourage community engagement. So he's going to tell us all about how Redbridge uses crowdsourcing. Then we're going to go over there, and I'm afraid Elizabeth's going to have to leave us at 7. But Elizabeth Linder is Government and Politics Specialist at Facebook. She's also been at YouTube and Google, so she's going for the cutting-edge media set, and she's graduated from Princeton, so she's going to tell us what government really should be doing if we really understood how to use all these platforms. Then we're going to go to Alex Butler, who was Transformational Strategy Director at, I think, the now defunct Central Office of Information. Is it now defunct?
Not quite, but almost.
A bit moribund. Anyway, the job.
Nothing to do with me.
And at COI, after COI, she led the Big Creative Challenge at the Big Society Network, and she's also been Strategy and Marketing Director of DirectGov. So she's got lots to tell us. So she now runs Kindred HQ, a community for independent workers and to take out, a boutique consultancy which aims to provide innovative solutions to business challenges. So she's got another CV to die for. She's going to talk about COI. And finally, and I have to declare an interest here, Simon's Director of Involve. My interest is that I'm a trustee of Involve, so I have to be super critical and mean to Simon. Involve is a charity that specialises in public engagement and participation and dialogue. It works with organisations from OECD, CDLG, the European Commission, UNDP, and loads of other acronyms. But Simon's also worked on almost all continents, and actually came out of the sort of development work, having worked at ODI, the Executive Director of One World Trust, and established the Global Accountability Index. We'll put up all these people's CVs, because I could be here for the rest of the day reading them out. But I think it's a very timely topic. I was just picking up some things. Vancouver is about to try and crowdsource how it manages budget cuts. The Dutch are trying to crowdsource how they set aid priorities. Just got a thing today that President Obama, after the State of the Union tomorrow, is going to have a virtual interview on Google Plus Hangouts. So virtual and social is everywhere, but does government know how to use it and use it well? Will. over to you.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much for that introduction. We're pretty panel heavy, so we'll try and keep it really sort of brief and then open up the conversation as much as possible. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Red Tape Challenge, which is a program I'm leading, which is designed deliberately as a crowdsourcing but also cross-government program. It's a program to try and hack back at the thickets of regulation that's grown up over a range of years. There's around about 21,000 statutory instruments on the books. Around about 10,000 of those have any sort of current purpose. And it's part of the Prime Minister's initiative to reduce the size of the state and to get less regulation on the books than he inherited when he came into power. It's crowdsourcing in that all of this is being done through a public process. So you cannot possibly put 10,000 regulations on the website and ask people to comment on it. So we do it by themes, theme by theme, sometimes sectoral themes like retail regulations, sometimes cross-cutting themes like environmental regulations or health and safety regulations. We list everything, we try and put it in plain English language, and we ask people to log on. It's very simple to just get to the website and then comment on it, criticise it, suggest it should be scrapped, amended, improved, kept in every possible way. And we just encourage as much as possible people to do that and give their views on these regulations. We then take that into a decision-making process in government. So we use the crowdsourced comments to populate what we've termed a project called Star Chamber. It's not an original name, but it puts the fear of God into some people, which is always helpful. And we go through all of the regulations, and the comments that people have made, the frontline comments, are used as part of that challenge process. It's a pretty fast-paced program. We launched it in April. We've now gone through 14 different themes. We've got another 14 to go, so around about halfway there. Of the 12,000 regulations that have currently gone to ministerial decision-making, over half of them are going to be scrapped or improved. So it had a reasonable amount of purchase in the way in which we've been making decisions about it. And the crowdsourcing element of it is turning out to be an important part of what we do. The website we designed it to try and be attractive. We designed it to try and be easy to use. We designed it to try and be sort of very light touch. And as a result of that, we've had decent amounts of traffic. We've had around about 27,000 comments on the website since we launched it. We've had 280,000 visits, nearly 1 million page views. On average, people spend about 4 minutes on the site, so that's not bad in web world. Around about 40% comes direct, 40% comes from referring sites. 168 countries, people from 168 countries visited the site, including 687 from India. I'm not quite sure why.
What are they saying about UK regulation?
I'm not sure exactly. I'll ask my team member who's planted in the audience helpfully to say where they went. And of course the themes vary in popularity. So we had a bunch of stuff on retail, quite a lot of stuff on equalities and environment. We had not very much on manufacturing. To be honest, it didn't ignite the crowdsourcing community, our theme on manufacturing. Interestingly, we launched this cognizant that previous attempts to crowdsource or do web-based consultations have not exactly been stellar successes. So there's been a lot of places where governments opened up and said, what do you think to the public? And quite often when the public speaks, people then put fingers in their ears and say, we really wish we hadn't asked. Interestingly, this one, we're getting a decent amount of good comment through this process. So, for example, on the retail, somebody logged on and said, look, I've been working in the field of consumer protection information for ages. It's ridiculous. We've got 13 overlapping laws and 28 bits of regulation, and we thought, absolutely right. So we're going to consolidate it all into one act and one set of guidance. We had B&B people logging on and saying, why do I still have to pay every year to have no smoking signs in my B&B when everybody knows it's illegal to smoke indoors, and it's still illegal to smoke indoors, and having signs in DH prescribed fonts all over the place is just a waste of time, and we happen to agree, so we're going to scrap those. People logged on and said, why on earth do I have to have a paper counterpart driving license when I've got an electronic one? Isn't that ridiculous? So that's going to be scrapped too. So these are just examples, there are many, many more, where people have come on and talked about the irritating, problematic, burdensome regulations that they face in their life, and we've used those comments as part of the challenge process. Now, of course, this is always a sort of an evolving art, and I think the Red Tape Challenge has been more successful in using crowdsourcing techniques than government's done previously. but there's a long, long way to go. I mean, when we looked at the quality of comments, around about 10% of the comments that were logged onto the site were thought by departments who received them to be useful. Now, the departments who received them is an important qualifier, but that's actually probably about 5 times higher ratio than I thought would come through public comments. Equally, we have a sort of private email inbox which pipes into the Red Tape Challenge team, and that's because some companies, individuals don't actually want to say what they say in public. Of those, we reckon around 40% are useful. So actually, that's not bad. That's not bad. I don't know what comparators are like, but 10% of public comments and 40% of private comments useful is quite good. The crowdsourcing component of it has been useful in other ways as well. Actually, just the fact that we've had to list all this stuff in public is quite shaming for some departments. I mean, some have looked at the 500 odd regulations they've got and the incredibly eye-wateringly dull descriptions of them and the inability to make sense of what they are, and thought, well, that's probably not really good enough. So when you just go through the process of saying we've got to put this stuff out, that quite often brings quite a lot of improvement. And the crowdsourcing element really has untapped in many areas, comments from people who otherwise wouldn't have bothered. I think those of us who do government consultations are fully aware of the rather usual suspects nature of the responses you get. You publish a green paper and you say, we'd like to ask some questions. And then the people who reply are the ones you met in the run-up to the green paper, and they tell you the things they told you in the run-up to the green paper, and you say, how interesting. We've now got the views, officially, of the things you told us in the meeting we had with you in the run-up to the green paper. And this is a slightly different, more unpredictable way of getting information. It gets beyond the lobby groups, which I find very bracing and very valuable. That said, there's a lot more that we could do, and there's a lot more we aspire to make crowdsourcing in this area and other areas too more valuable. So at the moment, the whole idea of crowdsourcing is to kind of get the distributed wisdom and knowledge of people out there into an intelligent conversation and into policy co-creation. And at the moment, we've got intelligent commentary from the 10%, but we don't have sort of co-creation or that sense of community and co-working, which is one of the ambitions of crowdsourcing. So Jill, you mentioned existing crowdsourcing elements. Iceland is crowdsourcing its constitution. It's doing it in a very intelligent and planned way. Lots of people are they're taking bits of the constitution and rewriting it themselves and then posting it up and saying, what do you think? We've not reached that level of engagement and involvement in amongst the communities who are logging on for us. So there's lots that could be done to take this to be better and to make it a more productive and positive feature of getting intelligent commentary and public opinion and wisdom out there into public decision making. But I think it's fair to say for us, this has been better than what's gone before. It's proven useful, certainly in our deliberations and our challenge and our thinking about regulation. It's untapped information which otherwise wouldn't have got. And to that degree, is a positive thing. But I'm totally convinced that government can do this much better over time and in a much more systematic way.
Okay. Can I just ask, has anyone in the audience submitted anything to the Red Tape Challenge website? Okay, moving swiftly on. Oh, what did you comment on?
It was something to do with procurement and small businesses, Jill.
All right.
It was just after you launched it, so it was ages ago.
Well, we'll see whether you're in the 10% that... Anyway, you have that private conversation with Will afterwards. Roger, would you like to give us the perspective from the other end? That's from the Cabinet Office now down to people of Redbridge.
Yes, thank you. I'm Roger Hampson. I'm the Chief Executive of the London Borough of Redbridge, which is probably that way, 10 miles that way, which you crowdsource which way east is, but I think it's 10 miles that way. It's 270,000 people. The organisation turns over a bit less than £1 billion a year. We employ 11,000 people. We deliver democracy and services and the overlap between them. In about 2006, we decided we wanted to use all the Web 2.0 technologies to try and improve our relationship with the citizens in Redbridge. So we started building something which we call Redbridge Eye, and if you've got a smart device, turn it on and Google Redbridge, and you'll be able to see what Redbridge Eye looks like now. By about 2007, we had on it personalization in the sense that you could log in. If you logged in, it knew where you lived, knew your postcode, would push to you things you wanted to know. You could customize it in the sense that you could change the front screens to tell you whatever you wanted to know. It would give you news about your neighbourhood. It would do a whole bunch of things. And if you go on there now, you'll see the third iteration of Redbridge Eye, and I'll come back to that in a moment, if I may. So by about 2007, we'd got a platform there with the beginnings of what is now 30,000 people with registrations with us, beginnings of quite a strong dialogue with individuals. And we decided we wanted to do some crowdsourcing, partly because my background, I didn't bother to give you a CV, but before I fell into local government, I was an academic in doing economics and social policy. I've got a long-term obsession with markets and crowds and how collective wisdom might be built up. So we decided sometime in 2007 that what we would do is we would try and take the largest problem we had, which at that time was that we were about £150 million short in capital. Redbridge has got very, very good schools. People want to come and live in Redbridge, but the then government's policy was not to give education money to people who were good at education. And the likelihood was that the residents were going to have to trade off the fact that they'd come to live in Redbridge because there was lots of green land with the fact that we'd have to sell some of it to build schools. And that's a very difficult decision for the council to make. So we thought what we'd try and do is put all the information we had about how you would raise capital money if you're a local authority. And all the things that we thought we ought to spend the money on, and give people a choice, and give them all the information. Actually, it moves slightly from crowdsourcing to basically the removal of fiscal illusion. You know, the fact that people think, I want all this stuff from government, and I don't want to pay for anything. So we built something which I'll give you a URL for it in a second, but I have to give you a warning. The warning is this was 2007, 2008, and smartphones didn't actually exist then, so we didn't configure it for smartphones. So you might go in and you might break your device. But if you go to www.redbridge.gov.uk/presentation, you can see versions of a presentation I would have given if we were giving presentations. And go to the first URL there, and it may crash your device. But you'll probably be able to see something which I can describe, and you just have to project from the magic lantern in your head, which is a very simple thing. It's a number of blocks down one side of a screen, which are things you could spend money on if you wanted. So if you want schools, if you want to spend money on highways, if you want leisure facilities, you just click on it. And when you click on it, a bar at the top moves leftwards and shows red because you're spending money. Down the right-hand side, there's a bunch of blocks, which is how you could raise money. You could sell land, you can raise taxes, you can do a number. And as you do those, it moves into green on the other side. And very simply, you can't get out of the page unless you paid for everything that you said you wanted. But more than that, if you click on the boxes, it will tell you more information. If you go back from it, it's got more and more and more information, and eventually URLs to everything that we own, everything that we spend. So you can consider as much information as you like as an individual before you're coming to your decision about how much you want to spend and what you want to spend it on and how you want to raise the money. So we ran that. We got altogether about 5,000 people in the borough to do it, which if you gross that up nationally is maybe probably about 1 million people if you were running a national thing. So it's a substantial percentage of the borough. I have to confess that only 3,500 of the 5,000 were online because as part of the price of being allowed to do it by local politicians, I had to do paper versions as well because people believe in digital exclusion. But very, very successful. It enabled the politicians to come forward with really very difficult policy proposals grounded in what actually people in the borough wanted to do. We also, in the process, asked people for their own comments, and we got about 1,000 suggestions of how we should run the council, of which actually only about 2 were unprintable. All the rest were very largely, of course, things we already knew, or things that were deeply unlawful and were never going to be lawful, but actually quite a bunch of reasonably good ideas. And we committed to people, and we did, pass every single idea to the relevant chief officer of the council, get them to write a reply to it, bang it up on the site. We were quite pleased with that. That ran till July 2008. Local government was fine for a while. I have to say one of the very, very great difficulties in making my organisation do that thing is, of course, people possess information. So one of the key things was to put the valuations of all our bits of land up that we might have to sell. Getting the valuations of land on a public site was just absolutely, completely, very, very, very difficult. Eventually, I told them to give me all the reasons why you shouldn't do this and write them down, and then I just instructed them to do it. So I did. And as a parting shot, I said, absolutely, the entire property market will not collapse if we do this. Then the entire international property market collapsed.
All Redbridge's fault.
As a result of that, there was an international economic crisis, and it became pretty obvious that the council was going to have to cut about 25 million quid out of our net revenue budgets, which is the stuff we don't have to passport through to schools or elsewhere. The controllable budget is about 200 million quid, and we were going to have to cut about 25 million out of that. So we built ourselves another device to consult the public, which again was constrained choice in the sense that if you go to the second of the URLs, if you can get to that presentation page, what it looks like, slightly more difficult to describe it, in effect 4 tabs down the side because you're going to have to look at 4 pages of information. At the top, there's a scrolling number thing where the numbers whiz around, one of those things which got 25 million quid equals 25% on top of the council tax. On the first page, there are 8 sliders which slide leftwards if you want to spend less money on something, rightwards if you want to spend more money on it. And you do those, you spend more money or less money, and the total at the top moves about. You have to remove the 25 million quid. And come down to, roughly speaking, 0% council tax. Go to a second page and it talks about how much we pay our staff, which obviously people wanted to reduce, largely speaking. Another page shows how we could raise income. Another has got various savings ideas. Again, we got 5,000 people to go through this device, simply considering, actually very carefully, actually very sensibly, if you've got a £25 million problem, how would you cut that money out of a local authority budget? Again, it removes fiscal illusion. You get what you pay for. Again, we asked for individual suggestions. We got about another 1,000. This time I refused to do any paper version, so we did the thing you should do, which is we got 5,000 people to do it. Some of those were people who we'd corralled in libraries or elsewhere because they didn't have internet devices themselves, and we took them through it. We were quite proud of that. We did some of the background work with YouGov and with YouGov and Commercial Concern, and they arranged with us to sell it on to about 35 other authorities, used it in the end. So we got comparative results from other authorities. We then thought, actually, given that we're now about to have George Osborne's first big budget, government should do the same. Government should get an equivalent to about 1 million people and run one before the government makes all these big choices. We talked to people in Number 10 who were quite keen on that, and they brought in some children from the Treasury who, of course, were all 100% deeply opposed to doing that and made absolutely certain the government wouldn't run it. So Stephen Shakespeare and I ran it anyway, and the last of the URLs you've got, if you get to that page, is a national version of would you cut money out of defence, would you cut it out of education, whatever. Do you want to cut the staff of civil servants, do you want to, etc. They ran that out to about 10,000 of their panel, about 2,500 I think of them did it. And actually you got all the results you'd expect to get. The broad mass of the cuts is exactly what Osborne would have gone for, other than the single thing, which is absolutely everybody's opposed to spending money abroad on foreign aid, which is probably the one thing that the government, in the middle of all the rest of the mess has stood by as the thing that they're in favour of, and good for them. So a couple of general points, if I might say, just the end. First of all, where we are with Redbridge Eye now is we've got it to a position where you can log in and see all of your transactions with the local authority. So the library books you owe, the council tax you haven't paid, anything you're interested in your local area will be there. And we're going on a pretty much permanent basis now to ask people about every major decision of the council. There's not, in my view, any reason at all why you couldn't have your account with the United Kingdom and be able to see your relationships with the United Kingdom and how much tax you've paid and what services you're in receipt of, etc., etc., etc. Actually, as a matter of fact, the reason that you have a cabinet the size it is, that's the number of people who sit, that you're capable of sitting in a room and having a discussion. The reason you have a parliament the size it is that's the number of people you can get into a very big room and have a row. Beyond that, we've had elections for very, very small choices. Either a list of people, or if you're Scottish, you're allowed 3 questions possibly. Other than that, very, very simple thing. There is no reason why now you can't have much, much more complex choices, either made or influenced on a very large scale. The first page on the first of the You Choose consultations we did with the sliders. Sliders have actually got 100 points on them. So if you've got 8 of them, that's 100 to the power 8 permutations you've got on that page, which I think is about 10 quadrillion. You know, the unbelievable numbers of options that you can go for, and actually it's perfectly easy to manage the result. It's perfectly easy to convey the result to policymakers. It's perfectly easy for policymakers to understand it. And you know, it's my country, and I want to be asked.
Okay, that's a great point to end that. I'm going to move rapidly on to Elizabeth.
Right, thank you. Well, first of all, I want to apologize for having to pop off to catch my train at 7. I do recognize a few faces in this room, but I did leave a rather large stack of cards outside on the table. So I do hope we'll be able to follow up on these conversations further at any time. As you can tell by my American accent, I got my start in my career in the technology world in California and started at Facebook 4 years ago. And one of the great privileges of having the opportunity to come from the headquarters, the heartbeat, the pulse of all of these new online mediums, if you will, is really having the chance to hear firsthand from our product engineers about how they go about thinking about services like Google, like YouTube, like Facebook, like Twitter. One of my personal favorites of our executives is our Vice President of Product, Chris Cox. And I find it fascinating to hear directly from Chris, who really is the mind behind many of our products, about the way that a site like Facebook goes about thinking about product development. Because it really does get back to crowdsourcing at the end of the day. The theory behind building a successful Facebook product, as Chris describes it, is to observe how people are misusing Facebook, because that's what they want to do with the site. And the first example we have of this is, for those of you who have been on for a while, you'll remember that there was no photo application. There was no way to upload photo albums. All we had was the one photo where you could put your profile picture. And the idea was that most people would have one picture that represented their own, themselves, like your passport photo. And what the early engineers started noticing is that people were vastly misusing this product. They were changing their profile picture sometimes every week. When you come back from a vacation, you change it almost every day to share this photo with your friends and family. And that's how the photo application was built, is observing this is what people want to do. They want to share photos. The same comes from the status update, the little box where we type in what we're doing. That used to have the verb is in it, Elizabeth is. And so people would just start ignoring that to say, Elizabeth is, I love London, what a beautiful day it is today. It absolutely made no sense. And so over time we observed that nobody really wanted the is. They wanted to express something that was their complete own sentence that they built from scratch. And so over time we scrapped the is from that little status box, which made a few of us sad for a while, but we quickly got over it. So really crowdsourcing is at the very heart of how Facebook operates and how our products are built. And in technology, that seems somewhat straightforward, especially technology that is built really around fast-moving products and innovation that can turn on a dime. Unlike some of the other types of products we have in our world that need to be packaged and mailed and printed. but really that distinction between observing what is it that people actually want to do and what is it that we think people should be doing is, I think, a very key distinction. And I'm really empowered to hear, even on today's panel, and especially in my everyday work, how many governments here in the UK and around Europe are recognizing this distinction. Is it really about what we think is good for people, or is it about what people are asking for? And sometimes is there a bit of a balance you need to strike? We know this is what you want, but we're also looking towards our analysis of what the 10-year forecast of this might be. There's a really interesting balance there that I think is especially important in the crowdsourcing discussion. But what technology provides us today, I think, that really makes a difference in our ability to crowdsource effectively is people are not afraid of the internet anymore. People will put their own viewpoints and their own thoughts and their own ideas on a site like Facebook or on a site like Twitter, and they, for the most part, understand that the people who are asking the questions on these platforms are listening. There's very powerful examples of these, especially in the UK. I just actually today learned about an escaped convict in the Staffordshire area, and the Staffordshire police are running ads right now with this person's picture saying, "Help us track this person down." You know, this is happening in real time. It's happening as we speak. That was the email I was responding to just before this panel started.
I haven't seen them in the audience.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like they're
right there.
Digital
Very
scanning
bad.
going on right now.
But the great advantage of a site, and I'll focus on Facebook simply because, of course, that's the service that I know best, but this pioneering of people being their real selves online is something that is very effective in crowdsourcing, especially on a site where, you know, in this country, we have the great privilege of having 50% of this population on a site like Facebook, all in one place, 30 million people. And each of these people represent themselves. They're not representing themselves through pseudonyms or through avatar images. You are who you say you are on Facebook. And so this opportunity to really tap into real people who come from real places, who represent real-world connections, provides a great opportunity. In the case of advertising, for example, the Staffordshire police can advertise to very specific cities that they're targeting where they're suspecting this person probably is. If you're not, you know, advertising, you have an opportunity to observe where people tend to spend their time based on political parties and posting on those pages, or finding people where you know you're trying to reach them. A few examples that I would perhaps highlight to just continue the discussion from the examples we've already heard. Actually, one of them does come from the UK, and it's perhaps one of my personal favorites, which is the Coventry Town Council that was trying to figure out how best to commemorate a day that they were coming together to think and remember World War II. And the council was trying to think, what sound should we play throughout the city for people to mark this day? And rather than hole up in a conference room for a while, shut the door, and think of the idea that would work for the citizens, the council put the idea out on Facebook and said, what do you think? What would you like to hear? We were thinking, are bells more appropriate, or is the air raid siren more appropriate? And the council was thinking people would err on the side of bells overwhelmingly, and especially this comes to signify the population that's now online. You know, our fastest growing demographic is 35 years and above. Many grandparents get on Facebook to connect with their grandkids and see photos. So the overwhelming response was that siren. And many of these people said, we haven't heard that sound since the last time it went out during this era. What a fascinating thought. And the town council thought about that, and that's what they decided to do. But I can't even imagine what it would have been like to be those people making that decision and realize this is what really would mean something to some of these people. It might be the last time in their lifetimes that they'll hear this sound. That means so much in their lives. Another, of course, Iceland was mentioned. Another one that comes from Zurich. There's a wonderful video called What Zurich Can Do for You. And it was candidates who were running for a higher office in government who ran a campaign to ask people, you know, what are the 3 things you'd like to see change in this city? Over time and over the course of the campaign, they identified the 3 things that were most important to the citizens. One, for example, was wireless, you know, free wireless in the entire city. And all 3 of those initiatives were pushed through and passed. and all of those candidates also won their next election. So it ties in nicely for political progress as well. But I found that very powerful as well, because the point of the campaign was to run a page on Facebook. They might have used other platforms as well, but they had a destination on Facebook, and then they would take people's comments and put posters around the city on boards. So when you signed up and when you participated in this Facebook campaign, you agreed that any of your comments could be used in the real world as well. So I think it's important also, as we think about how do you crowdsource online, to also remember what can we do to bring together people between the online space and the real world space to figure out how to reach everyone and to really foster a very good debate. The final one that I'll mention also actually comes from the States. About a year ago, the U.S. Army was taking a look at what kinds of careers they could promote for spouses. You know, it's notoriously a tough type of career to be a spouse and figure out what you're going to do with a lifestyle that's constantly moving. And so rather than just sit down and put together a brochure that seemed like it would be appropriate, the Army went out on Facebook and said, if you have a story, if you have a career that's worked really well or that's been a complete disaster, let us know and tell your story. Will mentioned the idea of providing links so that you could send email. They were not encouraging people to respond directly on Facebook. They wanted people to share a fuller story through a web-based form. So it's linking together through a page or an application. You know, there's so many opportunities now to just directly link whatever you're doing on a website into a platform where you know you're going to reach people. In the case of Facebook, 800 million if you get everybody. But perhaps just taking a look at how your demographics are looking, you can reach the people that you're wanting to reach. But also ask them to do something maybe in a manner that's more convenient for you. Maybe it's not the like button, maybe it's something that has more information where you can bring people back to it. So just a few thoughts. I really do think this space is actually emerging. And so it's very exciting to see this full a room as we think about what kind of opportunities we have today to achieve what representative government is all about, and that's bringing the people into the debate at the national or local levels.
It's not actually just this room, because our overspill room is also full, so we need to make sure that we give the people in the next door room a chance to participate. Alex, some sort of maybe speed up slightly, some quick sort of
Yes, I'll be
reflections
quick.
on where you've been at COI, maybe a bit about crowdsourcing the big society, I think, as well.
So I just wanted to pick up on what you said about being ourselves on the internet, because it works the other way as well. And I thought it'd just be worth a couple of observations. I joined government at the beginning of 2005 as DirectGov's first senior civil servant, and the first thing that I noticed when I came in, having not ever worked in any sort of organisation, well, apart from BT, which I'll explain, was how distant many of my colleagues were from the people that they got up in the morning to represent. We come to work in the morning as civil servants, I think, wanting to kind of change the world in our own little ways. I believed that all the time I was in the civil service, and I still do. But there was a real gap between the organisation that I was working for and many of the people who I knew used to talk to the brands that I worked for in previous jobs in marketing. But I don't want to just sort of beat ourselves up about that. It actually got a lot better as, over the 5 years that I was there. And I think there are a couple of kind of milestones during that time that I think were worth reflecting on and are reasons why I think we've got a very different view to the way that we use the internet. So DirectGov, well, I mean, we wouldn't have built DirectGov the way that we did had Web 2 been around when we built it, frankly. We just wouldn't. I mean, in those days, the way you built websites is you have very complex back-end systems, and like everything else that we do in government, it's, there's a big project plan and there was a very complex sort of approach to it. I think if Web 2 had been around, and in fact, actually, we used to use Redbridge as an example of a very good, agile, public sector website and how we ought to be doing things. And I know that there are significant moves to improve what DirectGov does in that way now. But although we did quite a lot to sort of rethink the way that the tone that we had and the way we design government websites in order to kind of greater reflect the sort of things that people were looking for. What we hadn't really got was this kind of view that we could actually be out there on the internet. We didn't actually have to have these websites where we could put our point of view and hope that with a bit of marketing everybody would come to them. And the big change there was a fantastic report that was commissioned by the Cabinet Office Minister at the time, called The Power of Information. Alex Allen, I think you were involved in that. And that had very, very far-reaching effects, actually, into the way we thought about not just communication, but actually how we could turn to the web and the websites that people were naturally going to find out from people how they might, for example, design public services better, or what they thought about our policies. We weren't saying, here we're running a little a consultation on our website and it come to our link. Here we were actually going to NetMums and we were going to Money Saving Expert and all the other good websites run by completely independent organisations, and we were starting to have conversations in those places. I guess my one observation about that time was that although I think we made very far-reaching changes in the way government communicates, and government communications sort of picked up on that all over time quite well, I don't think we ever really reached into the to the nether regions of the policy world, and I think that machine did grind on quite a long time, just doing what it did, because there was still a sense, and this might be a little controversial, but there's a little sense that we're experts at it, and people who aren't within government don't know how complicated it really is. That, and the fact that I don't think we really had the right processes in place to make sure that when we did solicit what people thought, that it landed in the right place. Now, I know a lot has gone to change that, but at the time, I think we lost a lot of great ideas coming from people who actually use the services that we design. And I still think that there could be more to do that. In a real forward from that, actually, it was unthinkable at the time when we did Power of Information that a few years later we would run some very significant crowdsourcing projects. I'm talking about the Programme for Government, which we put up as a commentable document, and Your Freedom, and the Spending Challenge. The Spending Challenge was a really big one. And that was genuinely, I know because I was heavily involved, a real honest attempt to just throw open the doors and ask the public what they thought our money should be, the nation's money should be spent on. And that was an amazing thing. It was transformational on many levels. There were lots of things that went wrong about it, but I think that's absolutely all part of experimenting and trying to make what we do work better. A lot of things were learnt out of that, which now have gone to make the process work better. But I think that the one thing that I'm not sure, I'm not convinced, has really changed is this point again of making sure that it really does. It is baked into the policy making process. It is part of what you do. I can't believe that fast streamers coming into the civil service now don't expect this is the way things happen, because that is the way they've been forever. And they must find it very strange. I'm sure there are some fast streamers here, and I'll ask them later. But that we would ever have done things differently. Why would you not ask? And let's face it, if we aren't there asking them the right questions and that can help make a difference, they'll be putting this somewhere else. And we at the very least need to be part of those conversations.
So, Alex, did anything change in the programme for government as a result of?
Good question.
You know, I was teasing Will about the fact he's wearing a coalition green tie. Has anything changed the coalition, the programme for government as a result of?
No idea, because I wasn't part of it.
I was part of it, and I
Yeah.
don't think anything did actually change as a result of it.
All right, that was Emma
I think
Thwaites.
it was baby steps at that.
Yes, it was.
Things changed as a result of your freedom, and more things changed
Yes.
as a result of spending time, and more things
Yeah.
changing as a result
I think that's right.
Okay, so
I
that's
think
So we learned.
upward curve.
Okay, and finally we're going to have a Simon Burrow from involved. Simon's going to give us, I think, a bit of a general overview actually about what works and doesn't work.
Speaker 5, on the end of an evening, following a panel of Nobel Prize-winning economists. There's no pressure. It's a good panel. I'm going to be very brief. I'm going to go back to basics in the short time I've got. I'm going to tell you 4 uses and a kind of general level of what I think government can use crowdsourcing for. And at the end of that, I'm going to give you one very simple message that's really going to be saying almost exactly the same as Alex said in a slightly different way. Crowdsourcing, just going back, crowdsourcing is a new term from 2006, coined in Wired magazine. I think that's important, because if you go on the net and you look at sites that describe themselves as doing crowdsourcing, they're picking up on this zeitgeisty term. But actually, one thing, what we call crowdsourcing, I think has been done for a lot longer than that. And 2, what many of these sites are doing isn't actually crowdsourcing, they just called it that. I think that's important, because unless you really understand what you're doing, you're not actually doing it properly, and you raise expectations, and I'll come back to that. How many of you ate the bean on your seat? Oh, you're going to really struggle from now. I wasn't allowed PowerPoint. I thought I need a gimmick, so the jelly bean is my gimmick. And I'm going to use it in an increasingly tenuous analogy to explore the 4 uses of crowdsourcing. So, some of you have still got your bean. How many beans do you think are in this bag? Any guesses? 150. 200, 150, any more? 100. Okay, so you get the picture. If I were to take the time to ask all of you the answer, we'd have some that are at the low end, some at the high end, and we'd have a basic bell curve, and we'd expect, the intuition would be that the number of beans would be broadly somewhere in the middle, in the mean. And obviously, the wider I went, if I went into the room over there and asked them how many beans, I'd increase the size of my crowd, we'd expect more the answer to be closer to the real answer. And this draws on the notion that as individuals we don't know the right answer, we don't have all the information, but as a crowd we're intelligent. I think you've heard some of that reflected in what's been said tonight, this notion that the crowd is in some way intelligent. However, not all crowds are equal. The people in there didn't get a bean, and after this, in a naked attempt to increase my number of Twitter followers, I'm going to invite my Twitter followers to say how many beans they think, and the closest Twitter follower to the answer will get the beans and a coffee or lunch with me if they really want that. But not all crowds are equal. They can't see the bag as easily. They haven't got a bean. I think that's important to think about as you're thinking about crowdsourcing. But it's a pretty trivial use. Government's got high-powered economic service, high-powered scientific advice and so on, and actually should it really be playing a guessing game with the public when actually it can really get information from pretty hard sources. So use 1 is a pretty trivial use, but I think it underlies everything. Use 2, put your hand up if you got a red bean or if you had a red bean. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Blue bean, 7. Blue bean. No blue beans. Oh, a purple one. Okay. Well, so what I could do is if I wanted to know the colours of the beans in here, I could spend I don't know an hour separating them out, counting them out, and working out what the colours of the beans, distribution of the beans were in the bag. It may be quicker, particularly if I can develop a good platform, just to collect the information that's now distributed in the crowd, and that is one really valid use. Collecting distributed information, and indeed it's been used quite effectively. In 2009, Typhoon Ondoy hit the Philippines capital, Manila, and a geology professor first of all used Facebook to crowdsource where people were trapped by the waters, and later on he evolved this into crowdsourcing how high the floodwater raised. And now Manila has a fairly effective crowdsourced map of heights of floodwater, and you can understand how government might use that to then plan flood protection and so on. If I had more time, I could go through a process to understand the preferences of the crowd. You'll now need to imagine that I'm not some policy wonk, but I'm actually a bean manufacturer. And I could ask who liked the taste of the red beans, who liked the taste of the blue beans, who liked the taste of the really dodgy brown-coloured bean, and so on. And I could build up a picture of your preferences of the bean, and I could alter the composition of the bag as a result of your preferences.
And you can see how that might be useful in policy terms. You've got a doctor's surgery that surfaces, I don't know, 15, 20,000, 30,000 people, and you could say, I'm not sure that I'm opening at the right time. What's the best time for me to open for you? And you could begin to collect information about when people want the surgery opened. I want to burrow into this a little more because it's going to get to the nub of my key points. Extending my jelly bean analogy now towards breaking point. You've done the crowdsourcing exercise well. You've asked all the right questions. You've discovered that the people who don't like red beans are parents because they think that the red beans turn their kids hyper. I've got no idea whether they do. Please don't sue me, jelly bean manufacturers. And this is an important market because actually parents are the ones who buy it for their kids. And if you can get rid of the red beans, you're going to make a killing. This isn't true, I don't think, outside the world of commerce, inside the world of policy. At least it's not true in every case. If you think about the doctor's surgery, in the doctor's surgery, that minority of people who want the surgery open at the awkward hour are also the people who cost the health service larger amounts of money. And by opening up the question about when you want the surgery opened, you've actually created yourself a problem. Because how are you going to balance the needs of the majority who say they want to open at fairly traditional hours with those who cost the health service a vast amount of money? You're then balancing preferences against cost of services. So crowdsourcing might expose this kind of issue, but actually it may well raise much more challenging issues. And what I don't think crowdsourcing can be used alone is to build political consensus. I think this is where if you think that what you're doing is crowdsourcing to build consensus, you're trying to do something else. And I think, as Elizabeth said, how do you bring these exercises offline? When do you bring them offline? And how do you do it? And so don't use the crowdsourcing hammer as if it's the only tool in your toolbox. Leads me to my final use. I've been asking you questions, imagine, about your preferences, and the person at the back, Owen Barder, is falling asleep because he's bored of these questions. I know you're not, I'm just picking on you. He's bored because actually the current colours in the bag aren't the right ones. There's this 1 in a million killer colour. He's got it. He wants to tell me it, but I've not asked the question. So my final use for crowdsourcing is around policy innovation, identifying new ideas. And I think that's where the red tape challenge is. It's where the spending challenge tried to be. And government has tried to use crowdsourcing in these ways, and we've heard about them. And I think it's motivated by 3 of the different uses. One is government has the idea that information is highly distributed amongst the population. And the second is that there are people out there who have good ideas, and that in some way the crowd is wiser than government. And we can see how that's driven by the way government thinks. I'm driving into my conclusion now. So I want to conclude with a note of caution. Drawing on our wider experience of public engagement, there's an issue of framing. I think the spending challenge got very close to this issue of framing. If you ask people to vote on their preferred hours for the doctor's surgery opening, they're going to see how the votes are distributed. They're going to expect the most popular hours, the ones that got highest votes, to be the ones when the doctor's surgery opened. But if you start taking into account how much the service costs, and you open the doctor's surgery an unpopular hour, you've really created yourself a problem. So how do you frame crowdsourcing so you don't raise expectations? Analogy really wildly extended now. So it's not only that parents don't like the red beans, but kids really like the blue beans. The marketing whiz in the company crowdsources an advertising campaign, gets the kids to make videos of dancing blue jelly beans and all sorts of things, and he goes back to the factory and says, make me more blue jelly beans, we're going to make a killing. For some technical reason, you can't make more blue jelly beans. I don't know what the technical reason is, but you can't. You've suddenly got expectations amongst your market dashed. And what you've done is you've created a problem for your brand because you can't deliver what you said you were going to deliver. And so my final message is this, my one key message is this, and it's to government to slow down. Take much more time when you're thinking about any public engagement exercise, whether it be crowdsourcing or anything else. How are you going to frame it? What expectations are you going to raise? Critically, how are you going to get those bits of government that need to respond to the spending challenge or the red tape challenge, how are you going to buy them into the public engagement process? So spend time engaging with government as much as you want to spend time engaging with the public. And now you can eat your bean.
Brilliant. Thank you, Simon. Elizabeth, before you dash off, is there any last comment you want to leave the audience with?
Any last comment? Well, I think we've just been talking about the expectations and the idea of framing an argument well. I think that's absolutely important, especially when you are looking at using something that's outside of the realm, potentially, that you really feel that you know. For example, if you're going to use Facebook to do your crowdsourcing, do be aware that Facebook is about sharing and it's about a friend network. So every time I were to vote on a government poll, I would know that the people around me know how I voted. I would know that my family would know how I voted. Yes, I can hide a story and be sneaky about it, but on average, people do express themselves on a site like Facebook in order for people to see what they're doing and participate in that way. In other sites, that's not at all the case. There's quite a few people who operate completely anonymously on a site like Twitter or YouTube, where you might get a different kind of response. So I think understanding different platforms of technology that you're using and how that interrelates to your answers is absolutely important.
Elizabeth, thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm very sorry. Thank you.
We're now going to throw it open for questions. If you are in the other room, people in the other room, and there are now emerging a few seats in here, and you want to ask a question, do come in, because then we can work that technology for you. So, we've got any people who want to ask some questions in this room? So let's take a little cropette, and then we'll have a bit of a Barney between the panel. Go there, then there. So yeah, say who you are. She said. By the way, this is all on the record, so be aware. Be very afraid. Yeah.
Felix Greaves, a medical doctor from Imperial College, and we've been looking at the data from NHS Choices, which is sort of TripAdvisor style stuff for doctors' surgeries, things like that. And we've found that actually the patients do seem to be quite wise. Hospitals they recommend have lower mortality rates. Hospitals they think are cleaner have lower MRSA rates. Really good. But then also, actually, it's not very well used. The average GP surgery has 2 ratings. A third of GP surgeries have no ratings at all. And those GP surgeries are the ones that serve older people, more rural populations and things like that. There are populations that are very clearly left behind by this. If we just listen to the voices that we hear by these routes, we listen to young, educated, urban, and sort of, it's easy to stereotype. But what do we do to increase the uptake and the number of voices that we listen to from the crowd?
Okay, let's go. Yeah.
Hi, Philip Rycroft, once of government, now happily in the private sector. A question really about the sort of qualitative as against the quantitative in all of this, that if you've got a hit rate of 10% in terms of good ideas, that's you're generating a lot of interest for a relatively small return in terms of the wise ideas coming into government. But how are you influenced by the numbers associated with those good ideas? And I'm thinking particularly in this context where just as this helps government to organise, so the sort of social media also helps lobby groups to organise. So the way that they can use this media to get their influence across the government. So how do you balance out those two things?
Okay, and then Alex?
Alex Allen was in the Cabinet Office until recently. I mean, I thought that the points about Simon made and others had commented on before about expectations being dashed is really important. I mean, one of the things where Will was able to say, hold out something that works is that he can actually show that some of the things that have come in through the red tape challenge have actually changed government policy, and you get the sort of positive feedback, and that can encourage more. And partly sort of Alex's point about is it baked into policy making, because I mean, I thought Roger made a very good point that when you're doing things about public spending, what does everybody want to do? Well, they want to cut overseas aid. Well, they're not going to get positive feedback on that, and in some ways that alienates them from the process. And I mean, the question really is partly to Roger, which is how much. I mean, I was looking at the Redbridge site as you spoke. I mean, I'm interested in how much the actual results of your consultation actually changed the council's policy. I mean, you've got sort of school improvements up number one. Well, did that change the way the council distributed its funds?
Okay, I don't want everybody to comment on every question because then we'll never get round most of those people. So, Roger, would you like to take that direct challenge from Alex? And I'm going to ask Will about the point about the hit rates and stuff like that, and then go down this end of the panel to deal with what on earth to do about NHS choices, about which I have lots of views. But
yes, to act on what was said, yes. Actually, in our annual budget meeting, the Leaders' Council stood up and did actually very good, clear presentations showing exactly what the public had said and the difference between that and what he was planning to do, and he explained what it was. And actually, if you sort of fantasize that George Osborne had run the one we built for him, and had to stand up in the House of Commons and say, actually, broadly speaking, I'm doing all these things, but actually, we just disagree with you on foreign aid. We know the public want to do this, but we're not going to. Or for that matter, we know the public want to put up VAT by 2%, but actually, if you do the maths properly, it doesn't work. Actually, if a politician stands up and does that, Peter Kellner gives this lecture again and again and again. The public are no longer interested in whether politicians can repeat back to them what the politicians have just read in a survey. Everybody knows that politicians do that. The thing that absolutely buys you into a politician is you think by some trick that actually they're trustworthy and they mean what they say, even though broadly speaking they do what they've read it in the polls. It is possible to pull off that political trick. Clearly, you want to design the tool properly, as a number of people said. It really needs to be about a real issue. It really needs to be honestly balancing things out in the way that a reasonable person would probably come to the answer that's probably the answer you're coming to. And of course, you'll have real difficulty if on absolutely central policy matter the public disagrees with you. But then, if that's true, you've really got a big difficulty to begin with.
Okay. Will, what about this? Do you weigh the argument? It's quite notable. I read the Red Tape Challenge site on environment. And what was quite interesting there was 56% of people said environmental protection is not red tape. Another 15% wanted more environmental regulation. And you had about 6 suggestions that were any use to man or beast, most of which were repeal the Climate Change Act. So it's quite interesting. But I was really impressed until I discovered that language is on the 38 Degrees website.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, maybe this is all completely invalid. But do you just weigh it? Or
No. And I mean, I've tried to be really, I think, honest about us learning about how we do this well, and that means there aren't sort of toolboxes which are sort of perfectly formed. So, on the Red Tape Challenge, for example, the 10% figure is usable comment. Now, there's lots of comments like, scrap the Climate Change Act, or, over my dead body, scrap the Climate Change Act. That's an interesting comment, but it's not very usable from a deregulation point of view. So the 10% was around stuff that actually provides information which helped us grapple with the question of whether this was the right approach to tackling a social policy problem that underpins a regulation. So, this is not a weighing game. The thing I'd say about this, though, is honesty about how you frame the problem, I think, is really, or how you frame what you're asking people to do is really important. So, for example, if you want to ask people, a spending challenge, but you're not prepared to cut foreign aid, say it up front. Say, we're interested in your views, but we've already taken the decision that foreign aid is sacrosanct. So there's no point saying, cut foreign aid. It's just not on the cards. And likewise on the Red Tape Challenge, in some places we've said, actually the government's decided the Equalities Act is not going to be scrapped, the Climate Change Act is not going to be scrapped, that's staying. But within that, there's a bunch of stuff we'd like you to comment on about whether we can do it differently or better or other ways of achieving the same objective. So I think that point about framing is really important. Otherwise people will feel they're wasting their time. I mean, the other thing we do is, we're not quite there yet, but we ideally wanted to feed back to people the results of what they, what happened as a result of their action, which included, you logged on and you made this really interesting comment, but frankly, we couldn't do anything about it, or there were other reasons why we thought that wasn't the right thing, all the way through to, that was a great contribution and it's gone, so thank you very much. So, we've got to evolve a lot of these capabilities. The numbers game, it can never be. You mentioned the lobby point. Actually, they're quite easy to spot, because as you say, they tend to be cut and paste jobs, and all of a sudden you get 150 comments saying, we think cyclists should be freer to cycle on the highways. And then again. So actually seeing off lobby campaigns is not the problem. It really is about, I think, trying to be as upfront as you can about exactly what it is you're looking for, and what's on the table, what's not on the table. Being honest about the process you're using. We've never said, if you comment, we will directly take your comment and act on it immediately. What we said is we will use that as we take decisions about how we're going to tackle, how we're going to confront the deregulatory challenge. And feedback. Tell people what you've done in as personal way as you can if you have the ability, technology and resources to do it. So I think that's the approach we're trying to take. It's by no means cracked, but we're learning about how we do that, I think.
Have you considered, I was struck by your star chamber, which of course is very sort of hackneyed, used to dealing with spending, but have you considered actually making it a bit more of a sort of public hanging, where you actually expose the sort of process of deliberation around what do we do to a bit more public scrutiny, rather than we've got all your input and now we're going to take it away and then we'll tell you.
I'd love to do that. Yes.
Okay, excellent. Excellent progress. Now, what do we do about all these sort of pensioners who won't give any feedback? My mother was recently in the hospital and I gave some feedback. Well, my mother was terrified because she said, if you give even slightly negative feedback, the next time I go there, and that's the only hospital they'll ever take me to, they'll take it out on me. And, so I did put up some feedback. It went to a very obscure part of the website, I have to say. Not where I'd have put it, but anyway, after various emails to NHS Choices about why it hadn't appeared. So I just wondered, how do we actually make these sites more usable?
So there are a couple of things that I wanted to pick up on that particular point. First is that the NHS Choices feedback service, I think, is still run by patient opinion. No, not anymore? It's run by Choices, okay. All right. It used to be run by patient opinion, who were an independent organisation who came in to assist in the early days and indeed run their own kind of version of this, and it is extremely well used. And the sort of feedback that you get, contrary to being just a very binary kind of, do you like your GP surgery or not, is actually very...
Is it well used? On the hospital I gave feedback for, there were 55 comments on NHS Choices and 6 on patient opinion. Which I thought was really thin. But oh, right. Sorry. We're going to have another session with patient opinion.
Anyway, the point there was a documentary a couple of weeks ago. I don't know whether you saw it, about TripAdvisor. Yeah. Okay, and it was I think it might have been Panorama or something like that. And basically, what they said is, "Isn't it awful? Look at all these horrible people who go on holiday and they come back, and all they want to do is write horrid things about the hotels and the restaurants that they've used." Can you, for 1 second, suggest that TripAdvisor hasn't fundamentally transformed the hospitality industry? I suspect we would say it has. Okay, so that is essentially what I think we're talking about here. Could NHS Choices deliver that kind of service better? Could they look a little bit more like they really mean to take on board the feedback? Could they make it easier for people to feedback instead of sticking it down in a difficult part of the website to find? It should really feel that it's part of the entire process. So when you come out of your doctor's appointment or you've been in hospital, you get a leaflet that says, please go back and feed on us, back on the service that you've got back today. That's what it needs to feel like. If NHS Choices were truly a kind of consumer brand, that's what they would do.
Simon, do you have any views on any of these?
Well, I guess one of the things is not to rely on online. I mean, to be really clear about who the crowd is you want to source from, and be really clear about who is marginalised and what that means, and understanding how you might get to them. I think that's the fundamental thing. But to answer the question, well, I think it depends on who's missing and what resources you have to get to them and how important it is you get to them. But in principle, you shouldn't be expecting to hear from all those views. I'm not going to say it now, Will, but I've got a number of thoughts about how you might bring the public into actually giving some bite and some much more accountability bite to these sorts of processes. To take too long to explain now. But I think there's ways you can bring the public in at the beginning and at the end to hold you to account in a way that actually could be really quite helpful about educating the public and getting the public to be more aware of these sorts of things. My first version of this talk had 9 principles in it as well. It was just too complicated. So you got involved without principles. But I'm going to blog over the course of the next few days, and my final blog has got the principles, a number of which cover things like how you might begin to think, or at least how you need to think about stopping gaming, for example, and so on. So,
okay, so watch out for that, and we'll also spell Simon's name right on the write-up, so you can find him. Roger.
Just one quick, obvious technical point, which is once you're getting enough numbers onto these sites, then and you collect even small amounts of information about people as you go along, then it's possible to structure samples so that you're actually getting meaningful results despite the disparity and digital exclusion and all the rest.
Okay, I don't want to spend all our time on that because we are going to have another session where we're going to discuss armchair evaluation and things like patient opinion and things like that. Let's go to the back of the room.
Hello, my name's Adi Adiwumi. I work at GDS. My question is around the technical. It's a technical one. How do you review the information? So one of the reasons that I suspect questions that are used in consultations and surveys are so simple and so simplistic is the sheer difficulty of actually reviewing all the feedback and taking out the useful information, and just the sheer length of time that takes. And that's part of where people get lost. And you've given your feedback. You're used to giving feedback in various online environments. And you're thinking, well, I should get an answer fairly quickly. And it just doesn't work that way. And I think that's partly down to the point Alex raised about the fact that it's not built into the policy setting procedures, but also that we don't have a good way of doing a good technical solution for extracting the relevant information.
Yeah, let's go here and then here. So we'll go down the sort of wedding aisle as rather ostentatious he walks out. Yeah.
Okay, so Chris Hugh, I run the digital government unit at Policy Exchange. So, I mean, I should say I'm a big fan of crowdsourcing, but for the crowdsourcing skeptics in the room, it feels to me like lots of the classic application of crowdsourcing, the jelly beans in the bag, the OpenStreetMap, the where's the convict, they have an objectively correct answer. But a lot of what we're asking the public to do here doesn't have an objectively correct answer. So what is wrong with simply saying, you know what, we have crowdsourced this, it's called a general election, and the experts, you know, the civil servants who understand the legislation should be the ones figuring out where to cut the red tape. And, you know, we could all save ourselves a wee bit of time, money and bother.
Okay, that's quite a good challenge there from a fan of crowdsourcing. Anyway, yes, you.
Hello, my name is Patrick King from Objective Corporation. We specialise in consultation solutions for government. A couple of things that haven't come up yet, I'm interested to hear the view of the panel and the people in the room later, is about the quality of the feedback in terms of its real value. If you mentioned earlier, I think, Will, that there are some 27,000 responses. How many people live in the United Kingdom? Is that representative? Has it any real value? Those are the people who have access to technology, who have a view perhaps that they want to speak about. I come across organisations who go out to collaborate, who go out to consult with the public, and they may sometimes get many thousands of responses, but they don't track who made those responses. Have they responded? Have they actually responded before to other questions? You know, that sort of thing. It's really all about the quality of the information that's coming back. Also, what about the risk to those organisations who go to consultation but don't comply with the relevant acts in terms of, did we consult fairly? Did we ask the right questions? Have we got a hidden agenda and so on?
Okay, shall we just take, well, I think we've got some questions about the nature of feedback, how you use feedback. Shall we just take one more question here? Let's come down to the front here.
It's Penelope Gibbs. It's more a comment than a question that I think that it's not that easy, even if you're 38 degrees, to get somebody to write an email. So I work in the voluntary sector. So actually to dismiss every single email, however repetitive, I think is undermining what those people have done. It may have a lesser value than the individual contributions, but 38 degrees themselves, I think, would tell you, and I don't work for them, that in fact that lots of the people on their network won't respond to everything. They'll only respond to certain things.
Okay, well, do you want to come back? Because there's a sort of range of sort of questions emerging about, does this sort of, make the process too simple, sort of too simplistic? Can you capture? There's a range of views, actually, isn't this your job? I mean, won't you sort of, pay bunches of money in the Cabinet Office to actually make these choices after people have voted in a general election? And, how do you actually check the quality of what you're getting here? And how do you react? I mean, because if there are some really real campaigns where there's huge amounts of strength of feeling behind it, then, do you just discard them all into the campaigns box? We all know we've been there in government, sitting there and, just turning out the postcards because it's clearly a campaign, you don't have to answer all the points, whatever. So,
Well, I'll try and keep it brief, obviously. I mean, on this issue of sort of the sophistication of our understanding of responses, again, it feels like we're sort of Victorian in our ability to do this. I was just reading over the weekend about the sophistication of the Obama campaign, for example, in analysing in an extremely sort of emotionally connected way, the strength of different connections and sort of aggregating those up. And once you've got millions of these things, and then really, really sort of focusing where their campaign's going to be, and then you thought, blimey, that's 21st century technology, and I feel rather medieval in what we're doing. So, I'm sure that a lot more of this could be done a lot better, and I'm sure also that the tools, the analytics, and the mechanisms for doing that will change over time. And part of the point of being someone like here is to try and listen to what others are doing and understand that. On this sort of question of objectively correct answers. they don't exist. I mean, again, this is partly the sort of question I asked earlier about framing. What you're not doing is saying to people in this area, when you answer, we will just do whatever you say. All right, one of the glories of government is that even after we do the red tape challenge, for many of these things, there still needs to be a formal consultation. So people have another bite at the cherry, and then often there needs to be a consultation on the consultation, and so on and so forth. So, they're not short of opportunities to input and to sort of assess what's going on. In this case, it's just getting information, views, and in some cases expert opinion in ways that I've not experienced in my career in civil service in the past. And the comment that 27,000 isn't many, true, but 14, which is, I don't know what the average consultation response is, 42 or something, is even smaller. So at least it's better than what went previously. Again, can we do this better? Would we like to have hundreds of thousands of responses? Of course we would. But we're trying to do something that's reasonably effective and learn from it. But I think it's a very valuable process. At the moment, government's committed itself to a review of regulatory enforcement. Now, one of the problems anybody who's done any of this will know is that you go in to assess an organisation, and you're then faced with the organisation explaining to you, well, I'm not doing this, the person who's doing it, all the glories of their organisation. Actually, and finding out the real information of what's going on is very difficult. So why not go over their heads and ask people, okay, what was your experience of trading standards? What was your experience of health and safety, inspectors? What was your experience of environmental enforcement officers? What was your experience, in a slightly TripAdvisor model? Not because that tells you the answer, but it gives you much more information about what really is happening, how people are really experiencing this arm of government, what the bugbears are, what the praise is, where it's working well, where it's not working well. For me, that is great, very, very helpful, useful extra information that could be used to make government work better. And so I think we should continue to work in this way and try and explore it in a better and better way.
And what do you think it's improved quality in Redbridge? Quality of public debate? Quality of public engagement? For all the people of Redbridge, other than the 5,000?
Yes, I do. And yes, I do because we know quite a lot about those 5,000 people. So we know what they represent, and you can work back from who they are to what they represent. I'm actually a great fan also of, and we're going to build on this, on YouGov's business model, which is you get a panel of, in their case, about 300,000 people, and you curate that panel. You spend a lot of time on that panel. You find out who they are, you find out what their preferences, you find out the kinds of things that they've voted for before, and you use that as your basic tool rather than very widespread survey things. So one of the reasons we're providing logins for people in Redbridge, and we've got 30,000 logins now, when we convert them to the more modern kind, is that we'll then have a very large panel of people who will know quite a lot about, by collaborative filtering and all those other kinds of things that people use, we can say things back to them individually, but we can also derive from those individuals what the group of people, quite diverse group of people who live in Redbridge do. And this is a simple point here. It is possible, and most of us in this room have, quite complex, personalised relationships with an online bookshop, but the people who own everything you can see out of your window don't speak to you at all. And the disparity there, the Victorian disparity, is extraordinary.
Okay, I'm going to go to some more questions, then I'll bring in Sonia. If there are any points you want to bring in on those questions, then go for it. Let's go. We must let patient opinion have their voice, and then we'll come down here. Yeah.
I'm going to ask a different question, which is on patient opinion. It's becoming clearer, I think, that when people are judging services, they don't look so much at the stories as at the responses, because people are very savvy now about TripAdvisor type sites, and they think, well, maybe they're a bit of a nutter, or maybe the site was having the service was having a bad day. But actually, when you get a very cut and paste response to that, a terrible story with a cut and paste response, people really judge that hospital badly on that, in that light. So I think we're all going up the learning curve as we do this, and it isn't actually, TripAdvisor isn't the right model for this.
That's really interesting. Let's go down here. If anyone else wants to, we're probably on our last round of questions. If you've got some big questions, make sure you do it.
Hi. A bit's been said about this, but I'm Anne Griffiths from Ealing Council. I'm interested in exploring in more detail what it means for elected representatives. It's been touched on, but just the detail about how it changes their role, particularly when what the crowdsourcing reveals is that they want something completely different from what's planned.
Okay, let's just hold that. Any more comments, questions? Yes, in the corner. Come back, Kerry, and then over here.
Anthony Carpen, also former civil servant. General question, how do you go about crowdsourcing when you want to get hold, in particular, when people who would want to respond to such crowdsourcing are, for example, constitutionally prevented from responding in public, i.e. because they are a civil servant, serving police officer, or serving in the armed forces?
Okay, so I thought you were going to say prisoners and things like that. But anyway, I suppose they're all the same on a continuum. Yes.
Linda Addison, freelance consultant, and worked a lot in planning and in local government on transport as well. A comment and a question. I wonder how far the experts now looking at crowdsourcing and the principles and criteria that should be followed have looked at the years and years of work that planning has undertaken in terms of engaging communities from the Skeffington report onwards. There is a lot of knowledge about what you do and don't do if you really want to engage people effectively. And I think there's some lessons to learn that one shouldn't lose as far as that's concerned. But the question I'd like to put is how could local authorities use crowdsourcing in relation to local development frameworks, local plans as they now are? Because they are really complex and we really do need people to engage in them, and the current systems do not work.
Okay, I'm going to call a halt there. I'm going to go down. So, Simon, would you like to comment about the sort of some of the limitations, if you like, the points about elected representatives? Or?
Two or three things. I mean, I totally agree with you, Linda. And in fact, I've not got a vast amount of crowdsourcing myself, and my comments are based on our much broader understanding of public engagement. And for me, crowdsourcing is no different to any other form of public engagement. So I based a lot of my comments on exactly that. This question about elected representatives, I think, kind of feeds into this question that was about, we've got a general election and we elect people in, so why bother engaging? Or why bother doing crowdsourcing? Well, when you elect a party in or a politician in, you don't elect them because you agree with their whole manifesto for a start. You elect them because you broadly agree with what they want to do. And anyway, events change and things change. So things come up that didn't appear in the manifesto. So of course you need to engage. We're not in the Victorian era where people come from far-flung constituency and sit in the Whitehall bars forever. We are in a very different world. So I think, that answer relates to crowdsourcing as much as it relates to anything else. But I think you're right about the difference between objectively correct answer versus the kind of the opinion. And I think that's where really understanding whether what you're doing is crowdsourcing or whether what you're really trying to get to is building a political consensus, or you're trying to do something else, is really absolutely vital. So it's not just a framing question, but it's actually taking time internally to really properly understand what you're trying to do. And I think there are a number of elected representatives feel really challenged by this notion of public engagement. I'm elected to lead, and I guess I've got lots of things I want to say, but I'll finish on this point. I think our point there is there are different forms of leadership. There's the leadership which is a macho leadership. We're going to do this and we're going to do it. And I think that's right. There are cases when that's right. The aid is or is not the right way to do it. I personally agree it is the right thing that we will lead and do aid. Others might not. There's another form of leadership which says this is a very complex problem, planning, where there is no right or wrong answer. We don't know what people think. I'm going to open a space. I'm going to lead to open a space. I'm going to lead to listen. And at the other end, I will then lead out of it. That's a very, very different form of leadership that needs very, very different skills. And I think, frankly, a number of our MPs and many of our councillors just don't have them.
Alex, you bring up this point here about what about these sort of, not exactly the normal digitally excluded, but the silenced, civil servant, police officer, or whatever?
Well, the first thing I should say is, of course, civil servants are allowed to engage in social media, and you shouldn't think for 1 second that you're not. In fact, it's positively encouraged, and we actually run a mini bit of crowdsourcing. When I sat with Tom Watson way back, I don't know, it must have been about 3 or 4 years ago, we did a little mini crowdsourcing within the civil service to ask people how they wanted. We didn't want to produce a tome that everybody had to read, and we boiled it down to 10 points. We're very proud of the fact that we boiled it down to 10 points, and people fed back to us actually that worked very well. and I think they're still on the civil service website, so you can find it. Absolutely, you have to get involved in social media. Not to be would in some ways, I think, be to cut yourself off from a great deal of knowledge that you can find out there. So that's the first thing. The second thing on elected representatives is just purely an observation on my part, but I follow several politicians on Twitter and Facebook because I'm interested in that sort of stuff, and there are a couple that do it really well. I'm specifically thinking of Stella Creasy, for example, who is extraordinary. If you ever read her tweets, she just has an amazing tonality about her tweets, and she can at one moment be really under the skin of what's happening in her constituency, and the next minute she can be kind of championing something like the credit.
But Alex, do you see Stella? I mean, yeah, maybe take Stella as an example. One of the comments you had before is politicians tend to use social media to sort of be on transmit. It's rather less obvious that they use these things to receive and sort of, say, I've picked up this really interesting idea.
That's a challenge.
MPs I follow don't do that, as far as I can see.
No, and I think that's a challenge for civil servants as well. It's something that we've all had to learn over time. This idea that social media is about genuine engagement. It's about a conversation. It's not about switching our press releases off the Sun to Twitter. So, but Stella does that very well. I really do think it's worth going and checking people out like her, because you'll see who she follows, what she's talking about, and how she frames her questions. And I just think she's extraordinary in that respect. They're not all the same, though.
What do your elected representatives make of this? They feel made a bit redundant or whatever? And are you going to use this? Are you going to crowdsource your local development framework? And if so, how?
Let me start with that one. Chris over there made a good point about actually the crowdsourcing beans example, which is always used, is it's an enormously interesting heuristic device, but it's a really stupid way to count beans. What you need is to know beans. I think we probably haven't talked enough about using crowdsourcing for the processes of government. And there are the obvious areas, like we do child protection, government does security type stuff, where people have bits of information which don't mean anything to them, put together mean something really, really important. And we need to work on that quite a lot. The LDF, the Local Development Framework, to some extent is the same kind of thing. People have bits of information which, if other people knew that was the consequence of what they'd say, they say, well, I won't say that then. We're just beginning to look at that as a process, and we certainly should do that more. On the elected representative ones, my politicians believe that they're doing some really interesting, exciting, modern things, and they were extremely worried to begin with, and I had to buy them off with lots of other things. But eventually, they've come to the view that they have a richer, stronger role if they have more information, and it hasn't replaced them because they're still having to make the decisions. And I would simply predict that within 10 years from now, it won't be possible for a finance minister in a Western democracy to stand up and produce a budget without tying it back to what people have said they want. And a politician who can't do that isn't a politician. It's an easy thing to do.
They will. Do you think that message will be received well by the array of cabinet office ministers and the prime minister?
Well, I think this is an example where I mean this government politicians are well ahead of the civil service. I mean, I think most people who've come into the coalition government are totally at ease with a totally more online world, more Twitter, more Facebook, more blog. I mean, that's just the world. And it's the civil service that's kind of gingerly emerging into the sunlight of more open policy making, not the other way round. And as we emerge from our burrows into the sunlight of open policy making, a lot of the questions that people have raised and the challenges and the critiques of how to do this well, I think we're beginning to learn. But I don't think it's a problem with the elected members. I think elected members, as you say, exactly can see this as a better way and a more connected way that has decisions that they take in the right place, but allows them to connect, and allows them to get information and preferences and views and thoughts and information in a different way. Our challenge is to fit that into a model of government, and that involves financial accountability, and it involves stuff that's legal to do versus illegal to do, and all of the sort of tedious stuff that civil servants, not us collectively, me as a civil servant, has to do. But there's something good and powerful about it that we're trying to develop and learn from, and I think it'll just continue to build, to be honest.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you all very much. If you'd like to offer us some reflections on tonight, we've got the hashtag outside at, not at, hashtag IFG Crowds. So if you've got some sort of thoughts following that, then you might save Stuart the job of doing a meeting write-up, because you could actually just gather up all your thoughts and crowdsource what you thought and what you took away from that. So it'd be absolutely brilliant if you did that, and Stuart will be undyingly grateful. I'm still slightly mesmerised by this image of civil servants as the new meerkats, sort of. But anyway, I'll move on. I just want to do a quick advertisement. This is in that part of our policy-making series. We're actually starting another strand jointly with Nesta and NISA, which is a bunch of acronyms, on evaluation, evidence and learning in policy. And on the 13th of February, we have Rachel Glenister from the MIT Poverty Lab coming to talk about how much we can use experiments to improve policy. So if you want to do that and you're on our list, say yes. If you're not on our list, sign up to be on our list, because why aren't you on our list? Events at IFG or whatever it is. Anyway, Kerry and Lauren will know. But finally, after all those ads for forthcoming IFG events, can I hugely thank our panel, the absent Elizabeth Linder and the very present Will Cavendish, Roger Hampson, Alex Butler and Simon Burrell, for a fantastic evening. And join us for drinks outside, please.